Hello, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone. Welcome. This is AI Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today we'll be discussing the topic of enhancing business processes with Gen AI. And look, it's no secret that companies are increasingly turning to generative AI. And if you follow this show, you know that we talk about how Gen AI offers some powerful tools to enhance business processes and foster innovation. And today, we will look at how to unlock these benefits for your organization. First, we'll discuss how to identify which of your business processes will benefit most from Gen AI. Then we'll explore how to support our people through a Gen AI transformation. And finally, we'll talk about how to ensure our enhanced processes are worth the time and cost and will bring a solid return on investment. Look, we have a full panel today and we're going to dive in just a few seconds here. But first, I want to say thank you to everyone attending today. And that includes the folks that are joining us live on LinkedIn. Hello, everyone. And everyone joining us today on Zoom, thank you too. During today's discussion, I'd like to hear from you also. So I want to encourage everyone attending today to participate. Just join in with your comments in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way or a comment, just jump on in. I will attempt to get some of your questions and comments into the flow of the show today. And we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. All right, with that, let's get to our great panel today, starting with Dalmo Cerne, Senior Manager of Machine Learning Engineering at Workday. Dalmo, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Glad to be here, Kevin. Thank you for
Hello,
the invitation.
Dalmo. Welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from today, Dalmo?
Today I'm calling from Boulder, Colorado.
Wonderful, beautiful Boulder, Colorado. Welcome aboard, Dalmo. And also joining us today is Alexander Mikoyan, Vice President of Sales in Europe for Celebris Systems. Alexander, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, Kevin. Great to be
Hello,
here.
Alexander. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling from a wonderful city of Krakow, where there is a Euro HPC summit. People talking about HPC, AI, and quantum computing in Europe. Exciting event and exciting place.
Fantastic, Alexander. It seems like you're just in the room next door, so welcome aboard. Thank you for being with us. Also joining us today is Ken Hubble, Technical Evangelist at Melanum. Ken, are you with us?
I am. Hey, thanks, Kevin.
That's Melalem,
That
Technical
is
Evangelist at
Melolem.
Melalem. Ken Hubble, welcome aboard, Ken. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling from Durham, North Carolina, where I'm attending the All Things Open AI conference and took a break for lunch to do this.
Nice, welcome aboard. Well, thank you for spending your time with us. We appreciate it. And also joining us today is Fred DeLetter, Senior Director of Analytics, Data, and AI at Keller Williams Realty. Fred, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
Hey everyone, I'm in my boring home office in Michigan, but I'm happy to attend and share my perspective today.
Michigan is not boring.
My
All
home office.
right, well, gentlemen. Well, all right, gentlemen, welcome aboard today. We do have a full deck of folks and topics to talk about. I'd like to start by drawing our attention to an article published recently by Forbes titled Why CEOs Should Leverage Gen AI to Elevate Workforce Efficiency and Productivity. Look, the article highlights the potential impact of generative AI on enhancing employee and corporate performance. According to Accenture, integrating Gen AI into daily operations can boost productivity of highly skilled employees by up to 40%. Now, the authors warn us that Gen AI has the potential to transform collaboration and decision making, but it is absolutely critical, and we've talked about this on the show, to align its implementation with specific business objectives and employee development goals to fully realize those benefits. So I'm curious what everyone thinks about this article, and if you might have some ideas for some specific use cases or industries that see the most impact. Dalmo, I'd like to start with you first. What were your thoughts on the article?
The article actually made me think about something else, which was in 1865, there was an economist called William Stanley Jevons. And what he was observing is that the more the cost of coal went down, the more people started using that and expanding industries and the work on that. And that became known as the Jevons paradox. Today, with AI proliferating and the content of the article, what I'm seeing is the more AI becomes accessible, Gen AI and other forms, the more people start using that and finding different areas to apply and to get benefits from it.
Now, Alexander, what were your thoughts on the article, and what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that CEOs face in ensuring a smooth transition?
Look, I think in a way there is nothing new. Like with each technology, we need to think about return on investment, about the difficulties to implement this and how it affects the business, but also about the culture and talent. And there are some unique things with AI, things that probably bother the CEO. The liability question, who owns the hallucination of a chatbot? There is a talent question. What happens at the bottom pile of your talent with Gen AI. So these questions will have to be answered and they will have to be experimented on before we come up with the kind of standard school of thought on these kind of problems.
Now, Ken, the article points out that many organizations struggle to align AI adoption with business objectives and employee development, two critical factors. What strategies do you think leaders should use to ensure that their Gen AI implementation drives real value?
One of the biggest challenge, I heard this recently, it's a new acronym, FOMU, which is fear of messing up. And
Okay.
a lot of organizations right now are faced with just that. How do we incorporate AI into our workflow without messing up? And the challenge that they're facing is in being hyper risk averse in this regard. They're also not adopting as quickly as they should be. And so I think one of the biggest advantages to happen right now is that small businesses who are able to be more nimble and also resource restricted now have an opportunity to level the playing field by being able to augment their staff with AI at a very low cost compared to larger organizations that can't go that fast. And so now big companies are going to have a lot of competition they didn't have before.
Right. Now, Fred, what's your take on this article? It really is talking about applying Gen AI to make employees more effective. What is your experience at Keller Williams, and what are your thoughts on the article?
I agree with Alexander a little bit in terms of AI and traditional ML has been around for decades. Yeah, so a lot of companies were already in that playing field effectively, but I think with the non-deterministic nature of Gen AI, you have a couple of complications that you really have to be very conscious about. But in terms of projects initiatives, you really kind of, as the article alluded to as well, you have to start with some sort of SWOT, or understanding where the opportunities and the limitations of the capability and the Gen AI frameworks, and can be applied in those areas at scale that can actually have trigger and augmentation strategy, like the parallel saying as well, versus a lift and shift. So I think you have to do that homework very critically, basically, to make sure that you focus kind of the resources on something that will create incremental value versus kind of big tinkering.
All right. Well, the article is from Forbes. It's called Why CEOs Should Leverage Gen AI to Elevate Workforce Efficiency and Productivity. There is a link here in the chat featured. Look, folks, take a look at the article. What do you think about the article? We want to hear from you too. And what are your perspectives on really using Gen AI in ways that move the needle in terms of productivity and efficiency? All right. Very good. Well, let's move along into our main discussion points today. Look, to me, it's all about applying the technologies and the strategies in ways that make a difference. And that starts with identifying which processes really will benefit the most from a Gen AI application. A recent report from the Initiative for a Competitive Inner City and Intuit found that 89% of small businesses are now using AI tools primarily to automate routine tasks and boost productivity. But the question is, which tasks for me provide the most bang for my buck? And Daumo, what key factors do you think that businesses should consider when deciding which processes to automate or enhance with Gen AI to begin with?
The beginning with, that's the key element over there in the question. When I'm sure like lots of people have been asked the question, can you generate a report for me or create an analysis? Finding the information from all different sources, and the key over here being different sources. You can't really build a relationship among those data points in an easy way. That's where Gen AI can come and make really a difference. You get pieces of information that are initially disconnected, make sense of connecting them, and then producing a report, producing an analysis that is coherent, that can be understood by whomever is in need of that report. But in order to do that, you need someone who understands how the business works to kind of create an audit of the business and where the several different sources of information are going to be coming from. Places to begin with and perhaps apply Gen AI would be, what are places where a lot of errors are happening in the company, where correction needs to take place? What are bottlenecks in the process? How to address those? Repetitive tasks that could be mechanized in a digital way. Then what are the tools that you have available to you? Some of AI tools that are so efficient that it can be built on top of existing tools. For example, you have a web interface to your system, and you can have an AI tool to mimic a person operating that interface. Even if you scroll the page, it knows the context of what to do. So there are lots of potential places where Gen AI can come with a benefit for applying to companies, but it begins with that audit, with identifying the source of information and creating that framework for AI to come and make sense of connecting them together.
Right. You don't know what you don't know. um, all right, Alex, what can you share an example of one process that you think is that has seen significant improvement by applying Gen AI, and what example does that give to us, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah, so we have a lot of companies coming to us because we have some impressive technology, talking about how they, implement things differently. And I think if I think about the kind of the common denominator, a lot of these things start with something internal because there is less risk. You're less exposed to liability and, brand protection reasons. But also a lot of that is related to text. I mean, if you think about Gen AI, most of this initially comes from text, and text is the most kind of solved problem there. So you see things like HR processes where the resumes are being filtered, or where people can chat about their benefits, employee benefits, to an artificial agent to provide them with some advice. So you can think about anything internal and anything related to text, and analyzing masses of text is like a good start. But then you see amazing new shoots, which is, I don't know if you saw, there's a recent interview by somebody from Novo Nordisk where they think about writing some medical documents, which is not as simple as just chatting about your employee benefits, right? So that's kind of the real step.
Now, Ken, I want to ask about ROI. A lot of businesses struggle. Well, when selecting a process, it can be a struggle because it can be difficult to simply measure or understand what the potential ROI of the change will be. How can businesses assess the potential ROI of applying Gen AI to different processes before making an investment?
So, I'll use a good case study that I was involved in. So contact centers, they process millions of calls a day. And if through the use of conversational AI and generative AI, the AI is able to listen to the call as it's going on, not to replace the human being, but to listen for keywords and topics and sentiment that's going on, and then provide feedback to the contact center representative, so they're able to better or faster respond to the customer, ensuring that they've captured all the correct data, ensuring that they are recognizing some of the emotional state that the person might be in based upon the words that they're using and things like that. If they can resolve that problem in half the time that they had been traditionally solving it, and you do that times a million calls, that's a significant ROI for the amount of time it takes, but also the amount of additional customers that they can then handle. And they're handling it more accurately in many cases because they're sourced right to the knowledge base. And so the customer retention, the customer satisfaction goes up. So there's a lot of things that happen, some of them immediate and some of them over time from an ROI standpoint, that is fairly unique to what AI brings to the table.
Now, Fred, I've been asking about how to identify which processes are best to apply Gen AI to, how to maybe calculate and understand some of the ROI. But sometimes it's not a good match. How can businesses identify early warning signs that a process is not well suited for a Gen AI automation?
Interesting question. You also have to have some sort of kind of structured approach to doing this, I think. Yeah. So when you think about it, it's almost like a funnel of ideas and potentially use cases, whether they're more on kind of productivity efficiency gains or revenue profitability gains. But in the end, what organizations will have to do is, in a very agile, kind of rapid fashion, basically experiment to see if that attribution is there effectively. Yeah. And then also understanding, do you actually have a roadmap, line of sight to scale this in a kind of a holistic enterprise way effectively, so you don't necessarily get stuck in this POC how effectively? Yeah. So you do have to understand through some sort of structured process whether that attribution can be achieved, and can you then scale that to the system.
All right, we are here today with Dalmo Cerne, Alexander Mikoyan, Ken Hubble, and Fred DeLetter. We're here talking about enhancing business processes with Gen AI. And look, if you have a comment or a question for our panel, please pop it into the chat feature. We'll try to get some of your comments and questions into the flow of the show today. Now, gentlemen, I'd like to move us on to our second discussion point today, and that is really about the people involved. We talk a lot about the process involved with digital transformation and artificial intelligence, but really it's the people that make the change happen. And so I want to ask about supporting our people through a Gen AI-led process transformation. A study by the Boston Consulting Group found that only 14% of frontline workers have received AI-related upskilling, compared to 40% or more of leaders. This, to me, highlights the need for organizations to invest in training programs that equip all employees with the necessary skills to effectively collaborate and make the best use of AI. Dalmo, how can organizations ensure that their teams are properly trained and equipped to work with Gen AI-driven tools?
That's an excellent question and a big obstacle to overcome, right? The 800-pound gorilla in the room is the initial distrust. They do not know if is AI coming to take my job. This is a fundamental question that needs to be addressed, and that's a strategic move that it also has to include the tactical move, the execution of that plan, right? First, addressing head on the fears of job loss. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Is it something to augment like a calculator, or is it something to replace like a more sophisticated machine? So having that plan in place where you have projects already lined up, you address the people at the company, you have projects already lined up to go together with the announcement, and those projects that either people working to use AI to augment their work, to improve their productivity, to allow them to work on different things like creativity or strategic moves or other things that Gen AI cannot work on, and you allow the people to do that, or tools that we work alongside them to increase their productivity, to make it the output of their work to be higher, right? So addressing those fears and having a plan that goes alongside with that to put in place immediately. So you talk to people, address their fears, and you engage them into those activities that will move things forward. I think that's the framework to make the adoption of Gen AI successful by the company, not only leaders, but also employees.
Now, Alexander, I think Dalmo is making some really great points, and I want to get your take on it. I mean, should employees be fearful of their jobs? Can you give me an example of one company that has implemented, say, Gen AI or some automation into a process with the objective to reskill or upskill those employees, and then that has actually happened? Isn't it more likely that especially frontline workers will just simply be displaced and their fears of losing their job are actually warranted? What are your thoughts on that, Alexander?
Well, Dalmo is indeed did a very good job covering the points. Yeah, there are examples. I don't want to name them because some of them are our customers, but there are examples when people did the fact or did not hire, maybe not replace, but did not hire people to do the job because they had AI, or they say they had AI agents to cover those functions. Now, I think we're still to see, because we haven't seen any major company doing an investor call and saying we just gained 30% of profitability because we replaced everybody with AI, right? It hasn't yet happened. There are some examples which have been articulated, but we haven't seen anything checkable that we can do like with a public company. But there is a famous example which is publicized by one of the major AI companies where the company said we have replaced people with AI, but there is a question mark whether they actually did. I think I just want to develop maybe very quickly on one of the Dalmo's point, and I think it starts with the employees. So if you think about AI, it will touch all of our jobs, all our work, right? The way we work. So I think maybe the best way to start for a company is to expose people to what's possible for their everyday work with AI tools, with the tools which are readily available, Copilot, whatever form, right? If you're a software developer, you have one. If you're just a clerical worker, you have another. So giving them comfort with those things, and then I think don't forget that innovation with AI is going to be done by people. At the end of the day, it's me and other people in the business process who will somehow determine how AI tools will help us. If we are comfortable with the immediate tools that are available at the fingertips, we will be more comfortable in thinking how we can design a process that we are part of.
That's interesting. Ken, Alexander's really saying, hey, look at it from maybe a different point of view and provide what can you do to provide comfort and assurance and the benefits of using AI to the folks that may be in processes that may feel threatened. So that's an interesting take on that. Ken, what are your takes on that? And how can leaders foster a positive culture of change when introducing things like Gen AI into a business process?
Yeah, so it's funny. Every time an organization or a technological shift takes place, you see this happening, where there are those who feel threatened and those who see it as an opportunity. I can remember when I was in industrial design school, and when I first started, we were using drafting tools and airbrushes and paints and markers and
Right.
things like that to do all of our illustrations. And then 3D CAD software came into being. And I started using that. And I can remember some of my peers saying, that's cheating. You're now doing things, I was creating 60 drawings in the time it was taking them to do one. And so there was this transition that had to take place. And the way that we found successful there and then also in industry is finding champions that can be, the water cooler person that they go to, and that highlight how this can benefit the organization, benefit the individuals, and mentor and coach them in using this new tool, and not see it necessarily as a replacement, as we've said, but as a tool set that allows you to do things differently. And that's the thing that we're having to face more than anything right now. It's not that we're doing things, that we're replacing things. We're going to be doing things differently. We're going to be thinking about things differently. Even programmers, they're saying programmers are going to become much more software architects versus writing the actual lines of code. And so it's going to affect everybody, yes. everybody differently, yes, and it depends upon the type of role you have. But and this includes kids at home. I mean, the parents are having to deal with this right now. So this is permeating all of society. We're just focused on the business side of it because that's the part that, when we talk about our employees and where they're going, we have to get them to that stage. And that goes back to what Dahmer said about the education cycle on this as well. It's all about change management, and it's all about protecting making people feel safe, but not disillusioned about this. There is definitely something changing here, and everyone's going to have to adapt to it.
All right. We do have a comment coming in today from Lauren. Lauren, thank you so much for your comment today. Lauren is saying, when our company introduced Gen AI, my team initially feared job losses, but I shifted the narrative by involving them in identifying how AI could enhance their work rather than replace it. Then this approach turned skepticism into curiosity, enabling us to focus on more strategic, high-value tasks. I'm curious, Lauren, did you lose any people, any FTEs as a result of Gen AI, or did everyone keep their jobs? I'm just curious about that. But Fred, with Lauren's comment in mind, what do you suggest for leaders and change agents that may be fighting resistance to change in their organization? What steps do you recommend that they might do to overcome that sort of fear and get people over the fence, over the gap, if you will, of resistance to change when it comes to AI and Gen AI in particular?
Yeah, I think a lot of points were already made. I think areas like being very proactive, intentional, inclusive, but also how do you create a controlled environment in your organization where it's safe for people to kind of engage with those constructs? Yeah. So one of the things that I'm a proponent on is, so clearly you have to educate everyone in the organization across the value chain. And if you have some sort of COE in terms of AI already, it starts there with some of the, okay, bring people together to talk about emerging constructs. Yeah, and what does that mean for our organization, basically, in terms of pros and cons, and how do we identify those use cases? And it's really crowdsourcing ultimately. Yeah, you're not necessarily going to like steer them in a certain direction, but crowdsource people to come up in terms of, okay, how can this help me in my job? Yeah, or here's the untapped potential for our organization at this point. And how do you then kind of permeate that forward in terms of creating almost like innovation pods where people are comfortable cross-functionally to work on some of those ideas? And I think that's the kind of environment that you will have to instill in the organization to have innovation kind of coming bottom up and top down and proceed with that, to be honest.
All right, very good. Well, oh, Lauren, Lauren is back. In my case, no one was directly laid off due to Gen AI implementation, but some employees struggled to adapt. Yeah, I can see how that might happen. A few resisted the changes and eventually chose to leave, while the rest embraced upskilling, allowing us to transition to more strategic roles than being replaced. Well, that's the way it is with change, right? Even before we had AI to talk about, we had all kinds of change happening in all our organizations for years now. And some people just don't get across that gap. So Lauren, well, thank you so much for your comments and your contributions today. And everyone, if you have a question or a comment for our panelists today, feel free, pop it into the chat feature and we'll get it into the flow of the show. All right, now, gentlemen, I'd like to move us on to our third discussion point today, and that is ensuring that our enhanced processes will be worth the time and cost. And according to Forbes, only about 25% of companies are currently seeing a return on investment from their AI initiatives. Wow, that's a shock to me. This underscores the importance of strategically implementing AI to achieve measurable business outcomes and improvements that we can measure. Now, so I'm curious, Delmo, what metrics should we use to evaluate and measure the effectiveness of Gen AI?
That's it's possibly impossible to answer that question satisfactorily. The first, let's break it into smaller parts, right? When implementing Gen AI, that's an upfront investment. You have to contract the provider of the Gen AI if you're not building a model yourself. But even if you do, is an immense investment upfront. What processes you're going to apply that? So that is this aspect of the upfront investment. Trying to minimize that may compromise the results. Another aspect to consider is you're going to be tempted to first go and apply Gen AI to the places where you have the largest pain points. And there's gonna be a period of learning. So there's a cost of tuition, let's say, in learning where to apply Gen AI and what kind of results it's gonna yield. So should we go and apply to the place with the largest pain point and pay the tuition over there, or should the company apply in a smaller area and pay the tuition of learning in that smaller area, but it's not going to be able to measure results very effectively. So there is this trade-off you're going to have to make. The other thing is establishing the metrics themselves on how to measure. And that can be very, very tricky because some things you can only measure by removing it. For example, the benefit of your phone. You don't measure how it improves your life or whatnot, but if you take your phone away from you, now you can say, I can't get directions to go to place XYZ. I can't text a message like, what is the value of those things? So measuring is not only a metric that you see output increasing or productivity improving, but in the absence of that, what would be the core costs that you're going to be incurring? Would you miss it? Right. So those are like very tricky points to address to answer your question.
Yeah, those are really tricky. You know, Alexander Dalmo is pointing out the difficulty in really coming up with appropriate measures in this case. I think maybe that's why 25% of companies, only 25% of companies are seeing a return on investment. Could be because of simply the difficulties in applying measurements to it. Alexander, what are your suggestions for leaders and change agents in ways that we can measure? You know, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. What are your suggestions for the measures we should be looking at?
Yeah, why well always after Dalmo? Then I have difficulty thinking about stuff. He does such a good job. Listen,
Yeah, no pressure following Dalmo, right?
yeah, exactly. My answer is like this. So Gen AI, I mean, you can think about Gen AI as coming in two main shapes. One is AI as a product. So if you think about OpenAI, Anthropic, they have nothing else except a black box that answers your questions. Okay, that's the only product they have. I mean, they have a lot of wrappers, APIs, and stuff, but that's the product they have. There is another form of Gen AI, which is AI as a feature. So if you take a established software package, and I'm making this up, but I don't know,
Right.
the SAP, right? They have 10,000 features in their software set, and they have more than five maybe features that are Gen AI supported. So the question is like, maybe not going after massive transformation projects to start with, where you have a difficulty with measuring, etc., but starting to utilize, these new features to expedite the existing process that may have been supported by generic plain vanilla SAP, and now it's this enhanced version. So that will create, I think, a likelihood of success, and maybe it will actually be easier to measure, because if in the past you had to spend 2 hours to send letters to suppliers, if you're a procurement officer, now you can do it in 20 minutes, right? That's your kind of measure within existing framework and within existing process. It is difficult to measure if you completely revamped your process, and then you kind of, how do you measure this? What Dalmo is suggesting, taking away the phone, this is like a massive change. So difficult to measure. So I would say this would be my kind of advice, to start and to think about the measurement and to get used to measuring through this incremental usage of technology. And just final point, by the way, if we know we're all technologists here, we know exactly, I think Dalmo, you're with Workday, right? Nobody is using all the features of Workday, right? People may have, it's a common problem with the technology. We have pages and pages and pages of functional specifications, and people use first three. I'm simplifying this, but that's a common story, right? That happens. So this is not new with AI, I think.
Now, Ken, when I think of trying to measure my ROI, I'm always thinking first, in my brain is what's the cost of doing nothing, right? And what is the cost of applying this change in technology versus just keeping the money in the bank, for example, a net present value or something like that. Ken, what are your recommendations? How can organizations balance the upfront investment in Gen AI with the long-term savings or productivity gains?
Again, I think a lot of this depends upon the size of your organization, but there's another way to think about this. It's are you saving money? You know, are you cutting cost, or are you adding value or creating new opportunity? Sorry, creating new opportunity where that opportunity didn't exist before. In the case of smaller organizations, they may be able to offer services that they could never have done before by themselves. The beauty is that for a small organization where you may only have 5 people and 5 licenses of Anthropic is $150 a month, versus a large organization that might have several 100,000 people, and at $20 a pop or $30 a pop, that's a lot of money. So it varies. And I think that organizations have to look and say, okay, where do I want to focus my attention? Where do I want to cut costs, or do I want to add value? And you know, that's an age-old problem with buying equipment, buying anything to support your business. And so that's the challenge. That's what we're going to face as we go into this. I would say that, you know, organizations need to really seriously look at where are the key value points that they haven't been able to do before, that Gen AI would be able to help them. And whether it's adding, you know, as Alexander said, whether it's adding features or adding new services or creating new products totally.
Now, Fred, I'm really eager to get your take on all of this. You are a senior director of analytics, data, and AI at Keller Williams Realty. I can't imagine another industry over the last decade or more that has been more impacted by digital transformation than real estate and the realtors, you know, in general. Now with the advent of AI and the confluence with, you know, just a wealth of data that must be on hand. What is your take on all of this? Where are you folks finding ROI, and how do you measure it?
Yeah, it's going to be a couple of layers, like the other people were saying as well. I think you're going to have a layer where it's very decentralized in terms of like the consumer element. Yeah, people in the organizations are going to figure out basically how to use some of those capabilities to be highly productive, basically do their job better, more impact. And that's going to happen in a very decentralized fashion. Yeah, humans are only going to be limited by their own creativity, basically. And it's going to be a little bit of that people will figure out very quickly, like the consumer, of how they can supercharge their role effectively and be better. I think that's one layer that you will see a decentralized impact and see different paces in organizations where that's being more proactive, adopted, driven versus other segments in the organization. The other piece, I think, it's the perfect point that somebody made here, is kind of like, okay, in terms of value generation, one of the things that we couldn't do pre-Gen AI that now becomes very easily or accessible to kind of really create organizational impact. Yeah. And I always look at it from a kind of a defense and an offense strategy perspective. If you look at offense, basically saying, okay, look, I'll give you a kind of an example. Organizations have also always done kind of to a certain extent more like personalization. Yeah, how do you engage with your consumers? We've done that for decades by leveraging some of your data IP. You leverage some of your predictive signals with traditional ML, basically. But now with Gen AI, you actually have a creative wrapper as well to be supercharging your messaging strategy in a very tailored one-to-one bespoke fashion that you really couldn't do at scale, to be honest. Yeah.
Right.
So as organizations are figuring out basically like efficiency gains versus incremental value, basically very well in terms of their overall processes and how they kind of create value towards their consumers or kind of the in B2B environments, that's really where you're going to see differentiation.
Now, gentlemen, while I have you here, I'm wondering, I'd like to make maybe the next connection, and that is with agentic AI. Generative AI is known for generating content, and we have been talking about the impacts of generative AI. I'm curious now with the advent of agentic AI, which is AI that is now focused on actually performing tasks, and the kind of the linkage between the two. Where do we see that taking us in the next 24 months? Dalmo, what are your thoughts on that?
Should I go first or should Alexander go first
No,
this
go,
time?
Yeah,
go.
let's let
Go.
Alexander go first.
Okay. Be careful what you wish for.
Yes,
Look,
be careful now.
look, I think it's a very good question. And it is a very fashionable word, although nobody really knows what the exact definition is. I think every company has more or less different definition. You have agentic, you have assistants, what exactly is one and the other. The way I think about this is an example. So it's a made up example, right? So think about you want to buy a house in Italy, and that creates a number of streams. One stream is real estate. You have to find a house. One stream is legal. You have to get the papers in order, and then financial stream where your investments need to be restructured so you can make the down payment and apply for the mortgage and stuff. So you can think of these streams, and each stream is a task consisting of subtasks. So you can see how an advanced AI or a combination of AIs can solve this task. You can have a legal stream, real estate stream, and I think we will see some of that coming, where a relatively simple instruction, buy a house in Italy, will create the necessary pool. Today we give instruction, write a poem, and something happens on the screen, but there will be more of those, right? They will be connected and divided by into subtasks and implemented. So that's how I describe agentic AI to myself, right? It's something which takes simple instruction but creates a multi swim lane, multi reasoning work stream, artificial work stream.
And Ken, where do you see us headed in the next 24 months with the convergence of Gen AI and agentic AI?
So the interesting thing about agentic AI is, and it's something that I've talked about, with folks for several years now, and now that it's actually coming into being, it's pretty amazing, is that with generative AI, we tend to think of a singular conversation back and forth, or a singular task back and forth with the Gen AI, whether it's ChatGPT or MLLM, our product, or anything else. With agentic AI, you have the ability to say 10,000 of these things going out and doing things. So you can subdivide tasks in ways that never could be done before at scale. And you can also not just subdivide the task, but create one prompt or one generative AI process and have copy it with no cost. Basically, you're able to create thousands and hundreds of thousands of agents doing the same thing, but for very minimal cost. And that's something that when people get their heads wrapped around that, it's going to change the dynamics of how we think about running our businesses and running our operations.
Now, Fred, where do you think we will be headed with the convergence of generative AI and agentic AI?
Yeah, we've done a lot of work in this space as well. The interesting thing there is, how do you kind of scale it in a way that it can be completely autonomous? Yeah. Or where do you need to insert still human in the loop effectively to make sure you have some checks and balances in place? Yeah, but if you throw like tens or dozens of agents as part of a complicated workflow or ecosystem that you orchestrate for an end goal, you got to be kind of really understanding kind of implications if you inject something there in kind of an enterprise kind of setting. Yeah. So how do you deal with kind of, okay, depending on use cases, latency, or kind of like, what if agents are going off track and those kind of things? Yeah, when you really go deep into this, it's going to be kind of figuring out basically what's the right configuration and necessity of complexity case, yeah, versus I'm just going to use microservices, to be honest, to orchestrate this workflow. So you're going to really have to kind of assess using pretty much a SWOT again in terms of, okay, what are the opportunities, but also where are the weaknesses and some of the complexities that you have to deal with.
All right, and Damo, what's your take on the convergence of Gen AI and agentic AI?
So one interesting thing to mention, and I'm going to piggyback on what Alexander was saying. With agentic AI, you can have a process that is very, very long, and you're going to break it down in smaller pieces. And just like humans, not necessarily because we are in charge of a process that we execute every single step of it. With an agentic AI, every milestone of the process or every step of the process, that Gen AI or the agentic AI can stop and either request the help from a human, from another agent, or a specific dedicated function to execute that. So you can execute every single step of the process utilizing what is the best resource available at the moment. If I need to operate a machinery, I'm going to call the API, I'm going to interface with that machine. If I need another agent to do something for me, I'm going to do another agent. If it's a person, I'm going to notify that person, wait until the results come back, until that agentic AI is able to complete the entire process. So it's a great way of getting reproducible results, right? Because you have that framework established, and every single time it will be executed the same way.
All right, well, gentlemen, where has our time gone today? We have reached the action item round of the program. I'm wondering if each of you could provide us with one quick bullet point suggestion for action that our viewers can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today. Fred, do you have an action item for us?
Start with use cases first and map that out and see where incremental value can exist, I think, and then really iterate very fast to see if there's something there.
That is Fred DeLetter, Senior Director of Analytics and Data and AI at Keller Williams Realty. Fred, thank you so much for being with us. Ken, how about you? Do you have an action item for us today?
Yeah, to coin a phrase from a different brand, just do it. The biggest thing you can do wrong at this point is not try it, and not enable your people to try it, because they're going to anyway. You just want to make sure that it's within the framework of how you want to run your business.
That is Ken Hubble, Technical Evangelist at MLLM. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. Alexander, do you have an action item for us?
I want to build on what Ken said. I think it's not only enabling people, actually involving them actively, because they will, Gen AI with all the promise still cannot innovate massively, and people can. So if they have more access to tools, if they kind of understand how this all stitches together, they will be able to deliver value for you using these tools. And that would be the most natural and I would say harmonious way of introducing Gen AI into any organization.
That is Alexander Mikoyan, Vice President of Sales for Europe for Celebris Systems. Alexander, thank you so much for being with us.
You're very welcome.
And Damo Cerne, do you have an action item for us?
Yeah. So I would start with forming a small team with at least one person who has knowledge of how a process works. Then we can audit that process, all single steps of it, try to describe in every single step. Then apply Gen AI or agentic AI to that process, and you measure the outputs, and you measure if you remove that process, what would be the loss of that. That can create a framework that later you can scale to other areas of the company. And now you know the ropes on measuring and applying AI to your company in a way that's going to be successful or not.
That is Dalmo Cerne, Senior Manager of Machine Learning Engineering at Workday. Dalmo, Alexander, Ken, Fred, it has been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much. Your perspectives and advice are spot on, so thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. Please join us again on April 8th when we have another great topic of discussion, propelling your AI initiatives into new business opportunities. That should be another great discussion. In the meantime, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. Just check me out. I'm Kevin Crane, and check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of AI Talk. And until next time, I'm Kevin Crane saying thanks for watching.
Thank you.